With $51 billion in vehicle exports in 2023 and 93% of it going to the U.S., the Canada-U.S. auto trade system seemed too big to fail. But now, a single move has thrown everything off balance.
We'll be discussing EV mandates, of course, as well as a range of other policies to make sure the sector succeeds.
With Donald Trump's new tariffs targeting Canadian-made electric vehicles and critical metals, a trade war is heating up. Tesla sits in the middle, facing skyrocketing prices and a shrinking market.
They really don't want cars from Canada. So when I put tariffs on Canada, they're paying 25%, but that could go up in terms of cars.
In response, Canada has turned toward Europe, reviving its trade pact under CETA to build new EV deals that could sideline America. Is this the end of North America's unified auto market? And can Tesla survive Canada's shocking shift to the European Union? U.S.-Canada auto trade. Before tariffs, Canada and the United States had one of the strongest and most integrated trade partnerships in the world. In 2023, total bilateral trade between the two countries crossed $900 billion. Canada alone exported over $350 billion worth of goods to the United States, reflecting just how dependent both economies were on each other. A major portion of this trade came from the auto industry. Vehicles were Canada's second-largest export, totaling $51 billion in 2023. Every year, approximately 2 million Canadian-made vehicles enter the American market, forming the backbone of North America's cross-border auto flow. Ontario played a central role in this sector. In 2023, 28.9% of Ontario's total exports came from automobiles alone, alongside finished vehicles. Canada also supplied the U.S. with large volumes of steel, aluminum, and auto parts, critical components used in American auto manufacturing hubs across states like Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee. This integration was reinforced through the USMCA agreement, which allowed cross-border movement of parts and raw materials without tariffs. Together, Canada, United States, and Mexico produced 16.1 million vehicles in 2023, accounting for 17.3% of global vehicle production. North America functioned as a single, streamlined manufacturing ecosystem. Parts could cross borders multiple times before final assembly. Within this system, Canada's electric vehicle sector was accelerating rapidly. Ottawa had pledged to make 1 in 10 new vehicle sales electric by 2025, but that goal was reached 2 years ahead of schedule due to strong policy support, buyer incentives, and government investment in EV charging stations nationwide. This momentum translated into real numbers. In 2024, Tesla sold over 50,000 vehicles in Canada, mainly Model 3 and Model Y units. Tesla didn't just sell to Canadians, it also sourced from them. Canada's reserves of lithium, nickel, and cobalt made it a valuable supplier of critical minerals for Tesla's battery supply chain. Mineral development projects in Ontario, Quebec, and Manitoba drew international attention. Tesla and other automakers began exploring long-term partnerships with Canadian mining firms to secure stable and ethical sources of battery metals. These upstream resources gave Canada a strategic role in the clean energy transition. Beyond Tesla, Canada was attracting global interest from automakers investing in EV gigafactories and battery facilities. Provincial governments offered land, tax breaks, and international partners, further integrating Canada into the North American EV ecosystem. As a result, Canada played a dual role in the EV sector, both as a growing consumer market and as a critical raw material provider. This deepened the trade connection even further and positioned the country as a key player in the continent's push toward cleaner transportation. By all measures, the US and Canada were not just neighbors, they were co-builders of the modern EV industry. Their auto sectors were tightly interlocked and their green transition strategies aligned. EVs were no longer just vehicles. They were central to both nations' energy, trade, and industrial policies. But the stability didn't last. Trump's 25% tariff sparks trade war. On February 2025, US President Donald Trump issued a bold threat, a 100% tariff on all Canadian electric vehicles and metals entering the United States. He accused Canada of stealing the auto industry from the United States. He said, "They stole it because our people were asleep at the wheel." He further said, "If we don't make a deal with Canada, we're going to put a big tariff on cars. It could be 50 or 100% because we don't want their cars. We want to make the cars in Detroit." By March, those threats became action. The administration announced sweeping tariffs, 25% on all Canadian-made automobiles and auto parts, and 50% on steel and aluminum. These rates bypassed existing trade protections under USMCA and marked one of the most aggressive economic moves against Canada in decades. The new tariffs officially took effect on April 3rd. Practically, that meant a $50,000 electric vehicle from Canada would now cost over $62,000 in the US showroom. The increase hit both the manufacturers and consumers. Canadian-built cars became instantly less competitive, and US buyers saw fewer choices and higher prices. Automakers were quick to respond. Tesla, Ford, GM, and others warned of broken supply chains, disrupted production schedules, and severe price inflation. Automakers with cross-border operations suddenly faced logistical chaos. Assembly lines relying on Canadian parts slowed or paused altogether, while buyers began delaying EV purchases due to cost uncertainty. Tesla felt the shock more than most. Its battery supply chain relies heavily on Canadian-sourced minerals, lithium, cobalt, and nickel, used in its Nevada and Texas factories. With tariffs now affecting both raw materials and finished goods, Tesla faced a double hit: higher input costs and declining Canadian sales. This wasn't just a tariff, it was a cannon blast to North America's integrated auto supply chain. For decades, automakers operated across borders as if they didn't exist. Parts moved from Ontario to Michigan to Mexico and back again before reaching a final customer. Trump's move broke the rhythm overnight. The White House framed it as a necessary reset, forcing companies to build American and cut reliance on foreign suppliers. The tariffs were presented as emergency measures under national security law, targeting not just trade imbalance but also broader geopolitical concerns. But critics saw it differently. To Canadian officials and industry leaders, this was economic bullying. It undermined years of cooperation and investments that made North America a powerhouse in global auto manufacturing. And it came at a time when the region was ramping up its EV transition, a shared goal now thrown into disarray. Electric vehicle buyers weren't spared either. Electric vehicles already carry higher sticker prices than traditional cars. With tariffs layered on top, models that were once attainable with federal and provincial incentives are now pushed into luxury territory. Demand dipped. Dealerships saw cancellations. Suppliers braced for a downturn. The tariffs also created ripple effects beyond Tesla. Auto part manufacturers, steel producers, and raw material suppliers across both sides of the border reported falling orders and shrinking contracts. U.S. factory towns dependent on Canadian components faced shutdown or layoffs, despite the tariffs being aimed at protecting them. To complicate matters further, some U.S. legal experts challenged the scope of the tariffs. Lawsuits began to surface, questioning whether national security was being misused as justification for trade penalties. Still, the core tariffs, 25% on vehicles and 50% on metals, remained firmly in place. By April's end, the damage was visible. EV prices spiked, sales stalled, and production slowed, and the tightly wound US-Canada auto relationship was now fraying. For Tesla, the message was clear. If Canada becomes too expensive or unstable, the entire North American growth strategy could unravel. What came next was Canada's answer, a retaliation that would reshape where its EV industry was headed next. Canada's retaliation, the Plan B. Following the US tariffs, Canada imposed a 25% counter tariff on American vehicles entering its market. The measure targeted the same industry Trump disrupted, signaling that Canada would not absorb the economic cost without consequences. As Prime Minister Mark Carney said, "Our counter tariffs won't apply if they continue to produce, continue to employ, continue to invest in Canada. If they don't, they will get 25% tariffs on what they are importing into Canada." Some members of Parliament proposed even stronger retaliation, a 100% tariff on Teslas entering Canada. The proposal served both economic and strategic purposes. Tesla, which heavily relies on Canadian consumers and mineral resources, became a high-impact target for leverage. In addition to tariffs, Canada filed a formal complaint at the World Trade Organization, arguing that the U.S. violated international trade rules and the USMCA agreement. Canada's claim focused on the unjustified use of national security to justify economic protectionism. Parallel to legal and retaliatory responses, Canada accelerated its pivot toward the European Union. The shift builds on the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, signed in 2017. CETA eliminated tariffs on 98% of goods traded between Canada and Europe. Since CETA came into effect, Canadian exports to Europe have increased by 30%. The deal provides stable access to a bigger market with predictable trade policies and strong demand for clean energy inputs and vehicle components. The European Union, unlike the US, is not imposing sudden tariffs. It is actively seeking reliable partners in green energy, EV supply chains, and low-carbon manufacturing. Canada matches these needs through its abundant mineral resources and low-emission production practices. As part of its strategy under CETA, Canada is promoting 3 key exports to the European Union: critical minerals for EV batteries, green steel, and climate-aligned auto parts. Canada has substantial reserves of lithium, cobalt, and nickel, core inputs for EV batteries. Diverting these exports to Europe strengthens the EU's EV expansion and weakens US access to raw materials. These minerals are in high demand as Europe works toward phasing out internal combustion engines by 2035. Green steel production in Canada, particularly in Ontario and Nova Scotia, offers another advantage. Canada's decarbonization efforts position it as a clean steel producer compatible with Europe's climate targets. Joint green steel ventures between Canadian and EU companies are already under discussion. Canadian manufacturers are also exploring regulatory adjustments to supply Europe with climate-compliant auto parts. This includes EV batteries, drive systems, and electronic components, all in line with Europe's carbon reduction standards. Europe is actively supporting this shift. It sees Canada as a low-risk partner that offers stable governance, ESG-compliant mining, and aligned climate goals. Canadian exports are likely to receive fast-track treatment under EU environmental and industrial policies. This pivot comes with logistical challenges. Shipping costs are higher in Europe than in the US, and some regulatory standards differ. However, CETA provides a functioning legal framework for tariff-free access and alignment on product requirements, reducing the friction of this transition. Canadian trade policy has shifted toward long-term diversification. Policymakers are prioritizing stability and predictability over geographic convenience. The goal is to reduce reliance on the US market and ensure access to alternative global trade routes. This shift puts pressure on companies like Tesla. Canada has been a top market for Tesla vehicles, and also a vital supplier of the minerals Tesla uses to build batteries. Losing Canadian cooperation could raise Tesla's costs, limit raw material access, and disrupt its North American production planning. If the US continues to restrict Canadian exports through tariffs, Canada is prepared to redirect key inputs to Europe. This includes lithium from Quebec, nickel from Manitoba, and cobalt from Ontario, resources that could be used by German, French, and Swedish automakers instead of American factories. Ultimately, it is an actionable Plan B with trade infrastructure already in place. CETA gives Canada direct access to Europe, while retaliatory tariffs signal that the country is willing to defend its economic interests. Fallout for Tesla, North American trade and EV market. The latest tariffs threaten to impose a staggering 100% duty on Teslas entering Canada, which would effectively double their retail prices, pushing them out of reach for most Canadian buyers. Since Tesla typically sells around 50,000 vehicles annually in Canada, the immediate risk to sales volume and revenue is undeniable. In addition, Tesla's supply chain is under threat. The company relies heavily on critical minerals, including lithium, nickel, and cobalt, from Canadian operations. If Canada shifts these exports toward Europe under its new plan, Tesla's North American gigafactories are likely to face supply constraints and rising input costs, undermining production efficiency and long-term planning. Beyond Tesla, the disruption spreads to legacy automakers. Firms like Ford, GM, and Stellantis depend on Canadian-made steel, aluminum, and EV components. Concrete consequences are already surfacing. GM suspended production of its BrightDrop EV van at the CAMI plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, citing tariff-driven market uncertainties. The decision resulted in roughly 500 layoffs, and GM confirmed plans to reduce shifts at its Oshawa truck assembly plant, impacting another 700 workers. These developments highlight the immediate human cost of trade disruptions. At the same time, US factory towns are beginning to feel the pressure. As part supply becomes less reliable and more expensive, assembly lines in Michigan, Tennessee, and Ohio face a dual threat: decreased profitability and the risk of transitioning production closer to Europe or Mexico, where costs and logistics are more stable. In response to these vulnerabilities, Canada hasn't just waited. it's proactively redirecting critical mineral flows to Europe. Canadian exporters have locked in contracts with automakers in Germany, France, and the Netherlands, leveraging CETA membership to access a 450 million consumer market without tariffs or regulatory barriers. Meanwhile, companies like Volkswagen, BMW, Renault, and Stellantis are fast-tracking supply agreements with Canadian mining firms. One of the particular strategic importance is the shift in North America's EV supply chain center of gravity. If Canada-European Union ties deepen, the US risks losing influence over EV-related materials and manufacturing. That could shift decisions and supply routes in favor of European-based operations. For Tesla, the structural risks are acute. Elon Musk has previously labeled Canada a game changer for securing EV minerals. However, if Canada prioritizes European partnerships, Tesla would face stiff global competition, higher costs, and the need to find alternative supply routes, possibly disrupting its global production footprint. Notably, Canada stands to benefit from this trade realignment. In addition to tariff-free access, it offers policy stability, transparent governance, and demonstrable adherence to ESG standards. These factors make Canadian exports more attractive to European buyers, supporting long-term investments and market expansion. Still, the shift is not a perfect solution. Shipping costs to Europe are higher, and Canadian exporters must adapt to EU regulations in product standards and certifications. Moreover, it will take time to repurpose factories and logistics networks to serve European clients effectively. President Trump's second-term trade policies continue to disrupt North American economic stability. With such huge tariffs on Canadian autos, steel, and aluminum, and the threat of broader increases in July is making things difficult for manufacturers on both sides of the border. With tariffs in place and exports shifting, the North American EV supply chain is no longer secure. So what do you think? Is Canada building a new EV alliance that leaves the US behind? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more updates on global trade and industry moves. Thanks for watching.